The blood on Martha Henderson's apron wasn't what shocked the church ladies during the autumn social of 1878. It was the fact that she hadn't apologized for it or explained herself at all. She had simply walked into the community hall in Silver Reef, Utah Territory, carrying 3 freshly dressed rabbits she'd snared that morning, placed them on the donation table for the widow's fund, and taken her seat in the back corner without saying a word. Mrs. Pemberton had gasped. Mrs. Chen had whispered something in Cantonese to her daughter. And Martha's own aunt, who had taken her in after her parents died of cholera 2 years prior, had turned 3 shades of red before excusing herself entirely. Martha was 22 years old and had been told by no fewer than 7 potential suitors that she was too quiet for marriage. The most recent rejection had come just 3 days ago from Robert Daly, a shopkeeper's son who had courted her for all of 6 weeks, before declaring that a man needed a wife who could entertain guests and contribute to conversation, not one who sat like a stone statue through Sunday dinner. Martha had nodded once, accepted his words without argument, and walked herself home through the dusty streets of Silver Reef, past the silver mines that had put their little town on the map, past the saloons where miners spent their wages, past the general store where flour cost too much and coffee cost even more. She wasn't hurt by Robert's rejection, not really. She had heard similar sentiments from others. Thomas Wright had said she made him nervous with all her silence. Peter Strand had told her aunt that courting Martha was like courting a ghost. Even kind-hearted James Murphy, who had seemed genuinely fond of her, had eventually admitted he needed someone more lively, more present, more something. The truth was that Martha had plenty of thoughts. Her mind was full of observations about the way light moved across the red rocks surrounding Silver Reef, about the patterns of animal tracks she found near the creek, about the way people's voices changed when they were lying versus when they were telling the truth. She noticed that Mrs. Chen's daughter was sweet on the blacksmith's apprentice, that the bank manager was skimming money, that the mine foreman drank more than he should. She saw everything. She simply didn't see the point in speaking most of it aloud. Her aunt, Beatrice Henderson, had different opinions on the matter. That evening, after the social had ended and they had returned to their small house on the eastern edge of town, Beatrice sat Martha down at the kitchen table with the severity of a judge delivering a sentence. "Martha Elizabeth Henderson, you are going to end up alone," Beatrice said, her hands folded on the worn wooden table. "You are a pretty enough girl, you keep house well. You can cook and sew and you're strong as an ox, but men want wives they can talk to, wives who will talk back. You sit there like a bump on a log and expect men to be satisfied with that." Martha looked at her aunt. Beatrice was 53, had been married twice, widowed once and divorced once, and believed firmly that a woman's survival depended entirely on securing a husband. In 1878 in Utah Territory, there was some truth to that belief. Women had few options for independent survival, especially in mining towns where the work was dangerous and almost exclusively male. "I talk," Martha said quietly. "Barely. You say the minimum required and nothing more. You don't laugh at men's jokes, you don't ask them about their work, you don't flutter your eyelashes or make them feel important. Martha, I'm trying to help you. I won't be around forever, and when I'm gone, what will you do? This house is rented. You have no income. You'll end up in the boarding house doing laundry for minors, or worse." Martha knew the "or worse" her aunt referred to. Silver Reef had its share of saloon girls and women who sold themselves to survive. Beatrice wasn't wrong about the precariousness of Martha's situation. Still, something in Martha rebelled against the idea of performing a personality she didn't possess simply to secure a husband. "Maybe I'll go west," Martha said. To California. Fine work in San Francisco. Beatrice laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. With what money? The stage fare alone would take everything you have. And then what? You'd arrive in a city where you know no one, with no prospects, no references, no protection. At least here you have me, you have the church, you have some standing in the community. The conversation continued in circles for another hour before Beatrice finally retired to her bedroom in frustration. Martha sat alone at the table, listening to the wind pick up outside. October in Silver Reef meant cold nights and the first hints of winter coming down from the mountains. She could hear coyotes in the distance and the occasional shout from the saloons on Main Street where miners were drinking away another Saturday night. She thought about her parents. Her father had been a quiet man too, a surveyor who preferred the company of his instruments and maps to people. Her mother had been warm and talkative enough for both of them, and they had been genuinely happy together. Martha remembered her father's face when he looked at her mother, the softness in his eyes, the way he would touch her hand across the dinner table. That was what Martha wanted if she was honest with herself. Not just any husband for security's sake, but someone who understood that silence didn't mean absence, that quiet didn't mean empty. She went to bed that night with no answers, only questions, and fell asleep to the sound of wind rattling the window frame. The next morning was Sunday, which meant church services. Martha dressed in her best dress, a dark blue cotton that had been her mother's, and braided her brown hair into a neat coil at the base of her neck. Beatrice was already in the kitchen, making biscuits with more force than necessary, still irritated from the previous night's conversation. They walked to church in silence, joining the stream of townspeople heading to the small white building that served as Silver Reef's Methodist Church. Reverend Patterson was a kind man, if a bit long-winded, and his sermons usually focused on hard work, community, and the dangers of excessive drinking. This morning he spoke about the story of Ruth, about loyalty and faith and how God provided for those who remained steadfast. Martha listened, but her attention kept drifting to the window where she could see the mountains rising in the distance. The peaks were already dusted with snow. Winter would come early this year, she could feel it in the air. After the service, as people gathered outside to socialize, Martha found herself standing alone near the church steps while Beatrice talked animatedly with a group of other women. Robert Daly was there with his family, pointedly not looking in her direction. Thomas Wright was courting Alice Patterson now, the Reverend's niece who laughed loudly at everything he said. Miss Henderson. Martha turned to find Samuel Thornton standing beside her. She hadn't heard him approach, which was unusual. Most men in Silver Reef walked heavily, their boots announcing them. Samuel Thornton moved like smoke. She had seen him around town before, but only rarely. He came down from the mountains perhaps once a month to trade furs and buy supplies. He was a trapper, she knew, living somewhere up in the high country away from civilization. He was the sort of man mothers warned their daughters about. Rough, unsocialized, more comfortable with wilderness than people. He was also the largest man Martha had ever seen. Samuel Thornton stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His arms were thick with muscle, visible even through his shirt, and his chest was a wall of strength. He wore buckskin pants and a heavy wool shirt, both well-made but clearly used hard. His hair was brown and hung past his shoulders, tied back with a strip of leather, and his face was all hard angles. Sharp jaw, straight nose, deep-set eyes the color of pine trees. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but it was neatly trimmed, not wild. Everything about him spoke of power and capability. This was a man who could survive alone in the mountains, who could fight off predators and weather storms and endure hardships that would kill softer men. He had scars on his hands, she noticed, the kind that came from working with knives and traps and rough living. "Mr. Thornton," she said quietly, "I found something that belongs to you." He held out his hand. In his palm, impossibly small against his calloused skin, was a locket. Martha's heart jumped. She reached for her neck automatically, finding the chain broken, the locket gone. She hadn't even noticed. "Where did you find it?" she asked, taking the locket carefully. It had been her mother's, one of the few things she had left. "Near the creek, east side of town." "I was checking my trap lines. The chain was caught on a branch." "Thank you," Martha said. "I must have lost it yesterday when I was checking my snares." Something flickered in his eyes, interest maybe or surprise. "You set snares?" "For rabbits. Sometimes I catch quail." "You eat what you catch." "I bring them to my aunt's house, or I donate them to the church. For people who need food." He studied her for a long moment, his green eyes intense. Martha met his gaze steadily, not looking away. Most people found her direct eye contact unnerving, another item on the list of her social failures. Samuel Thornton didn't seem unnerved at all. "You know how to dress them too, the rabbits?" "Yes. Who taught you?" "My father, before he died." Samuel nodded slowly. "Good skill to have." He paused, then said, "Your snare placement is decent, but you'd catch more if you positioned them along the actual game trail instead of next to it. Rabbits are creatures of habit. They'll take the same path every time if it feels safe." Martha blinked. It hadn't occurred to her that she was placing the snares wrong. "Thank you," she said. "I'll try that." "You're welcome, Miss Henderson." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that seemed oddly formal for such a rough-looking man, and then he was walking away, heading toward the general store with long, purposeful strides. Beatrice appeared at Martha's elbow immediately. "What did Samuel Thornton want with you?" "He found my locket. He returned it." "That man is dangerous, Martha. He's been living alone up in those mountains for 5 years, ever since he came here from Montana Territory. Nobody knows anything about him except that he can track anything, and he's killed more than one bear with his bare hands. He's not civilized. You stay away from him." Martha looked at the locket in her hand, at the care with which the chain had been wound around it to keep it safe during transport. He seemed polite enough. "Mountain men are not suitable company for decent young women. I don't want to hear about you speaking with him again." But Martha found herself thinking about Samuel Thornton throughout the rest of that day and into the next week. Not in a romantic way, not exactly, but with a kind of curiosity. Here was a man who had chosen solitude, who had walked away from whatever life he'd had before and made a new one alone in the wilderness. She wondered what that was like, to be so completely independent, to need nothing from anyone. She repositioned her snares the way he had suggested, and within 3 days she had caught twice as many rabbits as usual. The technique worked perfectly. It made her wonder what else he could teach her, what other knowledge he possessed about living off the land. 2 weeks later, Martha was at the general store buying flour when Samuel Thornton walked in. He had a bundle of furs over his shoulder, beautiful pelts that would fetch good prices. Mr. Jacobson, who owned the store, greeted him warmly. Samuel Thornton might be antisocial, but his furs were valuable enough that he was always welcome. Martha was standing near the back of the store, comparing prices on coffee when she heard Samuel's voice behind her. "The snare's working better." She turned. He was even bigger up close, so tall she had to tilt her head back to look at him properly. The top of her head barely reached his shoulder. "Yes," she said. "Much better. Thank you for the advice." "You're welcome." He reached past her, his arm easily extending over her head, and grabbed a bag of coffee beans from the top shelf. The movement made his shirt pull tight across his chest and shoulders, displaying the raw strength in his body. He set the coffee on the counter near her. "This one's better than what you were looking at. Costs more, but it's worth it." "I can't afford better." "Then why are you looking at coffee at all?" It was a fair question. Martha couldn't really afford any coffee, but her aunt loved it, and Martha had been saving small amounts from selling rabbit furs to buy her some as an apology for being such a difficult niece. "It's for my aunt," Martha said. Samuel studied her again with that intense gaze. Then he picked up the bag of expensive coffee and walked to the counter where Mr. Jacobson was tallying up the value of his furs. "Add the coffee to my order and put it on Miss Henderson's account as a credit." "Mr. Thornton, you don't need to," Martha started. "Consider it payment for interesting conversation," Samuel said. "That's a rare commodity." Before Martha could respond, he had concluded his business with Mr. Jacobson, collected his payment for the furs, and walked out of the store, leaving Martha standing there with her mouth half open and Mr. Jacobson looking amused. "That Samuel Thornton is an odd one," Mr. Jacobson said, wrapping the coffee. "But he's honest, never tries to cheat me, always pays his debts, and he just bought you the best coffee in the store, Miss Henderson. Must like you." Martha took the coffee home in a daze. When she presented it to Beatrice that evening, her aunt was thrilled, then immediately suspicious about where Martha had gotten the money for such quality coffee. "Samuel Thornton bought it," Martha admitted, because she was a terrible liar. Beatrice's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. "The mountain man bought you coffee. He said it was payment for interesting conversation." "Martha, what did I tell you about staying away from him?" He approached me, Aunt Beatrice. "Both times. I haven't sought him out." "Then you need to make it clear you're not interested. Men like that get ideas. He probably thinks because you're so quiet that you're meek, that he can take advantage." But Martha didn't think that was what Samuel Thornton thought at all. Something in the way he had looked at her suggested he saw exactly who she was, and found it perfectly acceptable. Over the next month, Martha saw Samuel 3 more times. Once at the church social, where he showed up unexpectedly and donated 2 deer carcasses to the winter food stores, causing a stir among the town ladies. Once at the creek, where she was checking her snares and he was checking his trap line, and they had a brief conversation about the coming winter. And once on the street, where they passed each other and he touched his hat brim in greeting while she nodded in return. Each encounter was brief, almost nothing, and yet Martha found herself looking forward to seeing him again. There was something restful about being around Samuel Thornton. He didn't expect her to chatter or perform. He seemed to appreciate her directness and her silence. When she spoke, he listened as though her words mattered. When she didn't speak, he seemed content with that too. November arrived with the first real snowfall. Silver Reef transformed into a white landscape, beautiful and harsh. The mines continued operating, but travel became more difficult. The stagecoach came less frequently. People stayed close to their stoves and their homes. Martha spent her days helping Beatrice with the endless work of keeping house. Cooking, cleaning, mending, preserving food for winter. She spent her evenings reading the few books she owned, mostly her father's old surveying manuals and a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets that had been her mother's. On a Tuesday afternoon in late November, Martha was walking back from the general store with a sack of beans when she heard shouting from the direction of the Silver Queen mine. She stopped, turning to look. A crowd was gathering. Someone ran past her toward the mine, and she caught the word collapse. Her heart sank. Mine collapses were every mining town's nightmare. She hurried toward the crowd, pushing through until she could see what was happening. The entrance to one of the mine shafts had caved in. Men were shouting, organizing rescue efforts, calling for shovels and timbers and rope. "How many are trapped?" someone asked. "At least 4, the foreman said. "Maybe more." Martha stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the organized chaos, feeling helpless. She saw Reverend Patterson arrive to pray with the worried families. She saw Dr. Brennan setting up a medical station in case there were injuries. She saw Samuel Thornton push through the crowd, carrying coils of rope over his shoulder and a pickaxe in his hand. "I can help with the shoring," he said to the foreman. "I know how to brace a tunnel." The foreman looked relieved. "We need all the help we can get, Thornton. You ever done mine rescue before?" "No, but I've dug men out of collapsed snow caves and avalanches. Same principle. You need someone who can fit through tight spaces and won't panic underground." For the next 6 hours, Martha stood with the other townspeople and watched as Samuel and a team of miners worked to rescue the trapped men. It was dangerous, brutal work. Twice the tunnel threatened to collapse further. Once, Samuel emerged bleeding from a gash on his arm where a rock had struck him. But he barely paused to let Dr. Brennan bandage it before he was going back down. By the time darkness fell, all 4 trapped miners had been brought out alive. 2 had broken bones, 1 had a serious head injury, but they were all alive. The crowd cheered. Women cried in relief. Samuel Thornton emerged from the mine last, covered in dirt and blood and sweat, and quietly walked away while people were still celebrating. Martha found him sitting on a pile of lumber behind the mine office, cleaning the dirt from under his fingernails with the tip of his knife. His shirt was torn, his face was bruised, and he looked exhausted. "That was a brave thing you did," Martha said. He looked up at her. "It was necessary." "Not the same as brave. I think they're often the same thing." He considered this, then nodded. "Maybe." Martha set down the sack of beans she'd been carrying for the last 6 hours. She pulled a clean handkerchief from her pocket and handed it to him. "You have blood on your face." Samuel took the handkerchief and wiped at his face. The cloth came away red. He tried to return it to her, but she shook her head. "Keep it. It's ruined now anyway." "Thank you, Miss Henderson." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the sounds of celebration and relief still echoing from the mine entrance. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. "You stayed all day," Samuel said. "Watching?" "Yes." "Why?" Martha thought about it. "I don't know, I couldn't leave." He studied her in the fading light. "You're different from the other women in this town." "So I've been told. Apparently it's not a good thing. Different from them isn't the same as wrong." Something warm unfurled in Martha's chest at those words. "The men here think so. They say I'm too quiet for marriage." Samuel made a sound that might have been a laugh if a laugh could be that rough and dark. "Men here are fools then. You don't think it's a problem, that I'm quiet?" He looked at her for a long moment, his green eyes intense in the twilight. "Your quiet is my favorite sound, Miss Henderson. In a world full of noise and nonsense, meeting someone who doesn't feel the need to fill every silence with chatter. That's rare. That's valuable." Martha's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever suggested that her silence was a gift rather than a flaw. "Thank you," she whispered. Samuel stood, moving slowly like all his muscles ached, which they probably did. He was so tall he blocked out the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "I should get cleaned up, and you should get home before your aunt worries." "Yes." Martha picked up her sack of beans. "Mr. Thornton?" "Yes, Miss Henderson. Be careful. With your arm. Make sure the wound stays clean." The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile beneath his beard. "I will." Martha walked home through the snowy streets feeling like something had shifted, like the world had tilted slightly on its axis and everything looked different now. When she arrived home, Beatrice was frantic with worry. "Where have you been? I heard about the mine collapse. I thought you might have been hurt." "I'm fine, Aunt Beatrice. I was just watching. They got all the miners out safely. Thank the Lord." Beatrice hugged her tightly. "Don't scare me like that, Martha. You're all I have." That night, Martha lay in bed and thought about Samuel Thornton's words. "Your quiet is my favorite sound." She touched her mother's locket, hanging once again around her neck on a repaired chain, and wondered what it would be like to be married to a man who appreciated silence, who didn't need her to be something she wasn't. December brought heavy snow and bitter cold. The mines operated on reduced schedules. The town turned inward, people gathering in homes and churches for warmth and company. Martha and Beatrice spent their days preparing for Christmas, making small gifts from scraps of fabric and bits of saved ribbon. Martha didn't see Samuel Thornton for 3 weeks. She assumed he was up in the mountains, weathering the winter in whatever cabin he called home. She thought about him often, though, wondered if he was safe, if he had enough food and firewood, if he was lonely. On Christmas Eve, the church held a special service. The building was packed with people seeking comfort and hope in the depths of winter. Reverend Patterson spoke about light in darkness, about hope, about the gift of love. Martha sat in her usual spot in the back, listening and watching the snow fall outside the window. After the service, as people were gathering to share cookies and hot cider, Samuel Thornton appeared in the doorway. He was dressed more formally than Martha had ever seen him, in clean dark pants and a pressed shirt, his hair neat, his beard freshly trimmed. He looked almost civilized, except for the raw power in his frame and the wildness in his eyes that no amount of grooming could hide. He was carrying a wooden box, intricately carved with patterns of pine trees and mountains. He scanned the crowd, and when his eyes found Martha, he walked directly to her, ignoring everyone else. "Miss Henderson," he said, "I made you something for Christmas." He held out the box. Martha took it, her hands trembling slightly. The craftsmanship was beautiful, the wood smooth and perfectly joined. She opened the lid and found inside a set of steel traps, small and elegant, perfect for rabbits and other small game. "They're better than snares," Samuel said. "More reliable." "I thought you might have use for them." "Mr. Thornton, this is too much. I can't accept you can. And you will, because I made them specifically for you and they won't fit anyone else's hands properly." He gestured to the traps. "See the trigger mechanism. I designed it to be sensitive enough for your touch. Most traps require more strength to set than women have, but these will work for you." Martha looked from the traps to Samuel's face. The entire church had gone quiet, everyone watching this exchange between the odd, quiet girl and the wild mountain man. "Thank you," Martha said softly. "This is the kindest gift anyone has ever given me. You're welcome." He paused, then said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Miss Henderson, I wonder if you would allow me to call on you properly, to court you if you're willing." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Beatrice made a strangled sound. Martha felt every eye in the church fixed on her. She looked at Samuel Thornton, at this massive, powerful man who had carved delicate traps just for her hands, who thought her silence was valuable, who had risked his life to save trapped miners, who moved through the world with quiet confidence and complete self-sufficiency. She thought about the alternative, about marrying someone like Robert Daly who wanted her to be different, or ending up alone and destitute. But more than that, she thought about how she felt when she was around Samuel. Safe, seen, accepted exactly as she was. "Yes," she said. "I would like that very much." Samuel's face transformed. The hard lines softened, and his smile was genuine and warm. Then I'll call on you tomorrow afternoon if that's acceptable. It is. He touched his hat brim, nodded to the room at large, and walked out of the church, leaving behind an explosion of whispered conversation. Beatrice grabbed Martha's arm. Have you lost your mind? You just agreed to be courted by a mountain man. A wild man who lives alone and has no real home and no stable income. He has income from his furs, and he has a home, just not in town. Martha, you can't be seriously considering this. He's not suitable, he's not safe, he's not civilized. But Martha was considering it very seriously. For the first time in her life, she felt like someone truly understood her. And that was worth more than all the civilization and suitability in the world. Samuel came calling the next afternoon, Christmas Day, dressed in his formal clothes again and carrying nothing but his hat in his hands. Beatrice answered the door with obvious reluctance and showed him into the small sitting room, where she proceeded to sit as a chaperone, her presence radiating disapproval. Samuel sat in the chair across from Martha, looking comically large in the small room, and said, Miss Henderson, I should tell you about myself, so you know what you're agreeing to. All right, Martha said. I'm 27 years old. I came here from Montana Territory 5 years ago after my parents died. I have no siblings. I make my living trapping and hunting in the mountains. I have a cabin about 10 miles north of here, up in the high country. It's a good cabin, solid, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. I have enough money saved to support a wife comfortably, though not luxuriously. I don't drink to excess, I don't gamble, and I don't chase women. I'm telling you this because I believe in honesty. I appreciate that, Martha said. What would marriage to you look like? Beatrice made another strangled sound, apparently horrified that Martha was already discussing marriage, but Martha ignored her. Samuel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Honestly, it would be quiet. I spend most of my time in the mountains, checking trap lines, hunting, maintaining my cabin. In winter, there are days when I don't see another soul. That's how I like it. If you married me, you'd spend a lot of time alone with just me for company. We'd come to town maybe once a month for supplies and church. We'd work hard, live simply, and depend on each other completely. It's not an easy life, but it's a good one. And I would never ask you to be anything other than what you are. Would I help with the trapping and hunting? If you wanted to, I could teach you everything I know. Or you could focus on the cabin and the garden and preserving food, whatever suited you. What about children? I'd like them if God blesses us with them. I'd be a good father. I know how to be patient and kind. I learned that from my own father. Martha considered his words. It was perhaps the strangest courtship conversation ever held, at least in Beatrice's sitting room. No flowery language, no poetry, no talk of feelings. Just practical facts and honest expectations. Mr. Thornton, Martha said. What made you decide to court me? He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. I've been watching you since I came to Silver Reef, he finally said. Not in a strange way, just noticing you. You move through this town like you're apart from it, like you're observing but not really participating. I recognize that because it's how I feel too. And then when I returned your locket and we talked, I realized you were exactly the person I thought you were. Someone who doesn't need constant noise and distraction. Someone who can appreciate silence and solitude. Someone strong enough to handle a difficult life without complaining. I knew right then that if I was ever going to marry anyone, it should be you. You've been thinking about this for a while then, since October. Martha felt something warm spreading through her chest. I should tell you about myself too. I'd like to hear it. I'm 22 years old. My parents died of cholera 2 years ago. I have no siblings either. I came to live with my aunt because I had nowhere else to go. I know how to keep house, cook, sew, preserve food, and trap small game. I'm stronger than I look. I don't mind hard work or solitude. I've been told all my life that I'm too quiet, too strange, not suitable for marriage. Every man who has courted me has eventually decided I'm not enough. If you're courting me expecting that I'll suddenly become more talkative or more sociable, you'll be disappointed. I'm not expecting that. I'm courting you because of who you are, not despite it. They looked at each other across the small sitting room, and Martha felt something click into place, like a trap springing shut, like a door opening, like a path appearing where there had been only wilderness before. "Then yes," she said. "I welcome your courtship, Mr. Thornton." "Samuel," he said. "You should call me Samuel." "Martha," she replied. "Please call me Martha." Beatrice stood abruptly. "I need to check on dinner," she announced and fled to the kitchen. Samuel's mouth quirked in amusement. "Your aunt disapproves. She thinks you're dangerous." "I am dangerous to things that threaten what's mine. But I would never hurt you, Martha. I want you to know that." "I do know that." They talked for another hour about practical things mostly. Samuel described his cabin in detail. The layout, the land around it, the stream nearby that provided water and fish. Martha asked questions about winter supplies and food storage, and what kinds of things grew in the mountain soil. It was the most Martha had talked to anyone in months, and it felt natural, easy. When Samuel finally left, promising to call again in 2 days, Beatrice emerged from the kitchen with her face set in grim lines. "Martha, I cannot support this. That man lives like an animal in the wilderness. If you marry him, you'll be cut off from civilization, from society, from everything. What if you have children? How will they be educated? How will they learn proper manners? The same way I learned, I suppose, from their parents." "Aunt Beatrice, I know you mean well, but I'm going to pursue this courtship. Samuel Thornton is the first man who has ever looked at me and not wanted me to be different. That matters more than all the civilization and society in the world." "You'll regret it," Beatrice said. "You'll be lonely and isolated, and you'll regret it." But Martha didn't think she would. Samuel called on her 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Each visit followed the same pattern. They would sit in the parlor with Beatrice as a reluctant chaperone, and they would talk about practical matters. How to smoke meat, the best way to cure hides, which wild plants were edible and which were poisonous. How to predict weather by watching the sky and the animals. On the 4th visit in mid-January, Samuel brought Martha a book. It was a journal, leather-bound, with blank pages. "For your thoughts," he said. "You don't have to speak everything aloud. Sometimes writing it down is enough." Martha took the journal, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Samuel. You're welcome." He paused, then said, "Martha, I know we've only been courting for a few weeks, but I'm not a man who wastes time. I know what I want, and I want you. I want to marry you. I want to take you up to my cabin and spend the rest of my life with you. If you need more time to decide, I'll give you that time. But I wanted you to know where I stand." Martha's heart was beating fast. This was sudden, rushed even by frontier standards. But everything Samuel said resonated with her own feelings. She didn't need more time. She knew. "I want that too," she said quietly. "I want to marry you." Samuel's face lit up with joy, and suddenly he was kneeling beside her chair, taking her hands in his. His hands were enormous, calloused and scarred, and they completely engulfed hers. "Martha Henderson, will you marry me?" "Yes." He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, reverently. "I'll make you happy, I swear I will. I know." Beatrice, who had been pretending not to listen from her chair by the window, burst into tears. "Martha, please reconsider, please. You're making a terrible mistake." But Martha wasn't reconsidering anything. She was, for the first time in years, completely certain about something. They were married 3 weeks later in late January of 1879 in the small Methodist church with Reverend Patterson officiating. It was a tiny ceremony. Beatrice attended, still crying and disapproving. A few townspeople came out of curiosity. Mr. Jacobson from the general store served as witness, and Mrs. Chen brought flowers from the greenhouse she maintained behind her boarding house. Martha wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her. Samuel wore a new suit he had bought specially for the occasion, and he looked uncomfortable but determined in it. His hair was freshly washed and tied back, his beard was neat, and when Martha walked down the aisle toward him, the look on his face made her breath catch. He looked at her like she was the only person in the world, like she was precious beyond measure, like he couldn't believe his fortune in winning her hand. The ceremony was brief. They exchanged vows, simple and traditional. Samuel's voice was steady and sure. Martha's voice was quiet but clear. When Reverend Patterson pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her carefully, gently, and Martha felt something in her chest expand and open. She was married. She was Martha Thornton now. And she was leaving Silver Reef to start a new life in the mountains with a man she barely knew but somehow trusted completely. After the ceremony, there was a small reception in the church hall. Mrs. Chen had made rice cakes. Mr. Jacobson contributed a bottle of good whiskey. People congratulated them, some sincerely, some with obvious doubt about the match. Beatrice pulled Martha aside one last time. "It's not too late," she whispered urgently. "We can say you're ill, that you need time. You don't have to do this. Aunt Beatrice, I love you, but I want this. I want Samuel. I want the life he's offering. Please try to understand." "I can't." Beatrice was crying openly now. "You're my sister's daughter, and I've failed you. I've let you run off with a wild man into the mountains, and I'll probably never see you again. You will see me. Samuel said we'll come to town once a month. I'll visit you. I promise." But Beatrice just shook her head, inconsolable. As the sun began to set, Samuel loaded Martha's few belongings onto his horse, helped her mount behind him, and they rode out of Silver Reef heading north into the mountains. Martha looked back once and saw Beatrice standing in front of the church, weeping. She felt a pang of guilt, but it wasn't strong enough to make her change her mind. They rode for 2 hours through increasingly deep snow and increasingly wild terrain. Samuel guided the horse with easy confidence, navigating paths that Martha couldn't even see. The sun set completely, and they traveled by moonlight, the snow reflecting enough light to see by. Finally, they emerged into a clearing, and Martha saw Samuel's cabin for the first time. It was exactly as he had described. Solid, well-built, with a stone chimney already trailing smoke. He must have come up earlier in the day to start a fire and prepare for their arrival. "Home," Samuel said simply, helping Martha dismount. The cabin was a single structure, maybe 20 feet by 30 feet, divided into 2 rooms by a partial wall. The main room held a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a counter for food preparation, and shelves lined with supplies. The second room, visible through an open doorway, contained a large bed covered with furs and quilts. It was simple and rough, but it was clean and warm, and it felt safe. Samuel tended to his horse, stabling it in a small barn behind the cabin while Martha explored her new home. She found the shelves stocked with food, dried meat, beans, flour, salt, sugar, coffee. She found tools and traps hanging neatly on the walls. She found a basin and pitcher for washing and a stack of clean towels. Everything was organized and maintained. Samuel might live roughly, but he wasn't careless. When Samuel came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, he found Martha standing by the fireplace, warming her hands. "What do you think?" he asked, and for the first time she heard uncertainty in his voice. "I think it's perfect," Martha said honestly. Relief flooded his face. "I know it's not fancy, it's not what most women want. It's what I want." They stood looking at each other across the cabin, and suddenly the reality of the situation hit both of them. They were married. They were alone. They were expected to share that bed in the other room. Martha wasn't afraid exactly, but she was nervous. She had only a vague understanding of what happened between husbands and wives, gleaned from whispered conversations and her aunt's oblique warnings. Samuel seemed to sense her nervousness. "Martha," he said gently, "we don't have to do anything tonight. You've had a long day, you're tired, we can just sleep. But we're married. We have the rest of our lives. There's no rush." The kindness in his words, the consideration, made Martha's nervousness ease. "Thank you," she said. "But I think I would like to be a proper wife to you. I'm just not sure exactly what that means." Samuel crossed the room and took her hands. "It means we figure it out together. It means we're patient with each other. It means I treat you with gentleness and respect always." He paused. "Martha, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm a man and I want you. I've wanted you since the day I first really looked at you. But more than that, I care about you. Your comfort matters to me more than my desires, so we go at your pace, not mine. Understood?" Martha nodded, feeling warmth spread through her. Understood. They ate a simple dinner of stew that Samuel had prepared earlier. They talked quietly about small things, letting the strangeness of the situation settle into something more comfortable. And when they finally went to bed, Samuel was as gentle as he had promised, patient and careful, making sure Martha felt safe every moment. That first night was awkward in some ways, as first nights often are, but it was also tender and sweet. Samuel's strength was carefully controlled, his large hands surprisingly gentle. He whispered to her throughout, checking that she was all right, making sure she wasn't in pain. And afterward, as Martha lay curled against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, she thought that this was what she had been waiting for all along. Not romance in the traditional sense, not flowery words or grand gestures, but this: intimacy, trust, safety, acceptance. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked quietly. "I'm perfect," Martha whispered. She felt him smile against her hair. "Good, sleep now. Tomorrow I'll start teaching you about the trap lines." Martha fell asleep in her husband's arms in a cabin in the mountains, miles from civilization, and she had never felt more at peace. The next weeks passed in a blur of learning. Samuel was a patient teacher, and Martha was a quick study. He taught her how to check the trap lines without leaving human scent, how to reset traps that had been sprung, how to dispatch animals quickly and humanely. He taught her how to read tracks in the snow, identifying what animal had passed and how long ago. He taught her which trees indicated water sources, which plants could be eaten in emergencies, how to navigate by the stars. Martha soaked up the knowledge like a sponge. This was what she had craved all her life without knowing it. Practical skills, useful information, ways to interact with the world that didn't require performing or pretending. In turn, she contributed her own skills to their household. She improved Samuel's cooking, introducing variety to his diet beyond meat and beans. She mended his clothes with neat, invisible stitches. She organized the cabin more efficiently, creating better storage for their supplies. They fell into a rhythm, a partnership. Samuel would check the far trap lines while Martha handled the close ones. They would work separately during the day and come together in the evening to share what they had found, what they had seen. They talked more than Martha had ever talked in her life, but it was comfortable conversation, not the exhausting social performance she had always associated with talking. And at night, they learned each other's bodies, grew comfortable with intimacy, discovered the private language of touch and breath, and whispered words that belonged only to them. By the time February arrived, Martha felt like she had lived in the mountains forever. Silver Reef and her old life seemed like a distant dream. They made their first trip back to town in mid-February, riding down together on Samuel's horse. Beatrice fell on Martha with tears and relief, examining her niece as though expecting to find her half-starved or beaten. "I'm fine, Aunt Beatrice," Martha said, laughing a little at the intensity of the inspection. "Better than fine. I'm happy." And she was. It showed in her face, in the way she moved, in the quiet confidence that had replaced her former uncertainty. Beatrice had to admit, albeit reluctantly, that marriage seemed to agree with Martha. "You look healthy," she conceded. "Are you eating enough? Is he treating you well?" "He treats me wonderfully, and I'm eating better than I ever did in town." They visited with Beatrice for a few hours, then stopped at the general store for supplies. Mr. Jacobson grinned at the sight of them. "Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, how's married life treating you?" "Very well, thank you," Samuel said, and the way he looked at Martha when he said it left no doubt that he meant it. They returned to the cabin laden with supplies. More flour, sugar, coffee, fabric for Martha to make new dresses, ammunition for Samuel's rifle, needles and thread, and a bag of peppermint candies that Samuel bought as a surprise for Martha. As they rode back up into the mountains, Martha leaned against Samuel's broad back and thought about how strange life was. 3 months ago, she had been convinced she would die an old maid, unwanted and alone. Now she was married to a mountain man, living in the wilderness, and happier than she had ever been. March brought the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt in the lower elevations, though the high country remained frozen. Samuel began preparing for the spring hunt, explaining to Martha that this was when they would make most of their money for the year. Bear were emerging from hibernation. Deer were migrating back up to higher elevations, and fur quality was at its peak. "I'll be gone for longer periods," Samuel told her. "Sometimes 3 or 4 days at a time, following game trails. Will you be all right here alone?" Martha thought about it. The cabin was secure. She knew how to shoot the rifle Samuel had given her, and she had plenty of work to keep her busy. "I'll be fine," she said. "I'll manage the close trap lines and work on the garden plot." "The garden plot? It's almost time to start seeds for the spring planting. I thought I would clear a space near the creek and plant vegetables. We could use more variety in our diet." Samuel pulled her into his arms. "You're planning long-term," he said, and she could hear the pleasure in his voice. "You're thinking of this as your permanent home." "It is my permanent home," Martha said. "Where else would I go?" He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and later that night he made love to her with an intensity that left them both breathless. True to his word, Samuel began taking longer trips, sometimes disappearing into the mountains for 3 or 4 days at a time. Martha found she didn't mind the solitude as much as she thought she would. She had work to keep her busy, checking trap lines, preparing hides, starting seeds in the small cold frame Samuel had helped her build, cooking, cleaning, maintaining the cabin. And when Samuel returned, usually exhausted and carrying fresh game, they would have long evenings by the fire where he would tell her about what he had seen in the high country, and she would tell him about the small dramas of the trap lines, the rabbit that had gotten away, the fox she had spotted near the creek, the way the aspen were beginning to bud. In early April, Martha realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be sure, then another, and when she was certain, she told Samuel over dinner one evening. "I think I'm with child," she said quietly. Samuel's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully. "You're sure? As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, All the signs are there. He was around the table in an instant, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Martha asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy." "Martha, I'm overjoyed. I'm terrified and overwhelmed and completely overjoyed." He pulled back to look at her face. "Are you happy?" "Yes," Martha said, and realized it was true. She was happy. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined being in this position. Married, pregnant, living in a mountain cabin. But now it felt right, like this was exactly where she was supposed to be. "We'll need to make changes," Samuel said, his mind already working through the logistics. "We'll need a cradle. More supplies. I should take you to see Dr. Brennan in town, make sure everything is all right. When do you think the baby will come?" "Late autumn, I think. November or December." "Before the heavy snows then, that's good. We'll make sure you're in town for the birth, somewhere safe with the doctor nearby. I'm not taking any chances with you or the baby." They talked late into the night, making plans, imagining their future. Samuel wanted to expand the cabin, add another room for the child. Martha wanted to preserve extra food, make sure they had plenty of supplies before the baby came. They were both nervous, but they were also excited. Over the next months, Martha's body changed. Her belly swelled. She felt the baby move inside her, first like butterflies, then like actual kicks and rolls. Samuel was fascinated by it, constantly wanting to feel the baby move, talking to Martha's belly, planning elaborate futures for their unborn child. He became even more protective than usual, insisting Martha stay close to the cabin, refusing to let her lift anything heavy, checking on her constantly when he was home. It was almost suffocating, except that Martha understood it came from love, not a desire to control. "Samuel," she said one evening in July when he had just stopped her from carrying a basket of vegetables from the garden. "I'm pregnant, not broken. I need to stay active or the birth will be harder." He looked chagrined. "I know, I'm sorry, I just worry." "I know you do. But you have to trust that I know my own limits. I'll ask for help when I need it." He nodded, but she could see it was hard for him to pull back. This man who was so confident in the wilderness became uncertain when it came to pregnancy and childbirth, things outside his experience and control. They made their monthly trips to Silver Reef throughout the summer. Beatrice was beside herself with excitement about the coming grandniece or grandnephew, already knitting blankets and tiny clothes. She insisted Martha spend more time in town as the pregnancy progressed, but Martha refused. "My home is with Samuel," she said firmly. "We'll come to town for the birth when the time gets close, but until then I belong in the mountains." By September, Martha was large and uncomfortable. The baby sat low and heavy, making it difficult to walk long distances. Samuel had finished expanding the cabin, adding a third room that would serve as a nursery. He had built a beautiful cradle from pine, smoothed and polished until it gleamed. Martha had sewn tiny clothes and blankets, prepared cloth for diapers, gathered herbs that were supposed to help with labor pain. In October, they moved to Silver Reef temporarily, taking a room in Mrs. Chen's boarding house so Martha would be close to Dr. Brennan when her time came. Samuel hated being in town, hated the noise and the people and the confined spaces, but he endured it for Martha's sake. Beatrice visited every day, fussing over Martha, bringing food and advice. Samuel tolerated this with surprising patience, understanding that Beatrice needed to feel useful, needed to be involved. The baby came on a cold November night, arriving after 12 hours of hard labor that left Martha exhausted but triumphant. Dr. Brennan declared both mother and child healthy. Samuel, who had paced outside the room for the entire labor, looking like a caged bear, was finally allowed in to meet his child. "It's a boy," Martha said tiredly, holding the tiny bundle. "We have a son." Samuel approached the bed carefully, as though afraid he might break something. He looked down at the baby, at the tiny red face and waving fists, and his expression transformed into something Martha had never seen before, complete and utter wonder. "He's so small," Samuel whispered. "He won't stay that way. Look at his father." Samuel carefully took the baby from Martha, cradling him against his massive chest with surprising gentleness. The baby looked impossibly tiny in his arms. What should we name him? They had discussed names but never settled on anything. Now, looking at her husband holding their son, Martha said, "What about Thomas? After your father." Samuel's eyes went bright with tears. "You do that, of course. He was important to you. I want our son to carry his name." "Thomas Thornton," Samuel said, testing the name. "I like it." Little Thomas slept peacefully in his father's arms, unaware that he had just been given a name and a legacy. They stayed in town for another week, giving Martha time to recover and making sure the baby was thriving. Then, despite Beatrice's protests and Dr. Brennan's concerns, they returned to the mountains. The cabin had never felt more like home than it did when they arrived back with their son. Samuel had kept the fire banked, and within an hour he had the place warm and comfortable. Martha settled into the rocking chair he had made for her, nursing Thomas while Samuel prepared dinner. That winter was harder than the previous one, mostly because of the demands of a newborn. Thomas needed to be fed every few hours, day and night. He cried when he was hungry or uncomfortable or lonely. Martha was exhausted most of the time, functioning on broken sleep and determination. But Samuel was an involved father, more involved than most men of that era. He would walk Thomas around the cabin in the middle of the night when the baby was fussy, singing to him in a surprisingly good voice. He learned to change diapers without complaint. He would hold his son for hours, just watching him sleep, marveling at the miracle they had created. "I never thought I'd have this," he told Martha one night as they both sat by the fire exhausted. Thomas was finally sleeping in his cradle. "A family, a home, someone to love and someone who loves me back." "Why not?" Martha asked. "Because I'm not easy to love. I'm rough and I'm not social and I prefer trees to people. I figured I'd spend my whole life alone." "I prefer trees to people too," Martha said. "That's probably why we work," he laughed quietly. "Probably." Spring came again, then summer. Thomas grew from a tiny newborn into a sturdy baby who could sit up and grab things and make sounds that might have been words. He had his father's green eyes and his mother's brown hair. He was curious and brave, reaching for everything, afraid of nothing. They made their trips to town regularly. Beatrice was a devoted grandmother, spoiling Thomas whenever she got the chance. The townspeople of Silver Reef had largely accepted the Thorntons' unusual arrangement, even if they didn't fully understand it. One summer afternoon in 1880, as they were leaving the general store, they encountered Robert Daly, Martha's former suitor, with his new wife. She was a pretty blonde who chattered constantly, exactly the kind of woman Robert had said he needed. Robert looked at Martha, at the baby on her hip, at Samuel's hand on her back, and said, "I hope you're well, Mrs. Thornton." "Very well, thank you," Martha said. "Congratulations on your marriage, and on yours." He hesitated, then said, "I think I misjudged you. I thought you were too quiet, but I see now that I was looking for the wrong things." "I hope you're happy, Mr. Daly." "I am, and I hope you are too." "I am." As they walked away, Samuel said, "That must have felt good, showing him what he missed out on." "Not really," Martha said honestly. "I don't think he would have been happy with me, and I certainly wouldn't have been happy with him. We both ended up where we belonged." "Wise woman," Samuel said, kissing her temple. Life continued in its rhythm. Samuel trapped and hunted. Martha tended the garden and the trap lines in their home and their son. Thomas grew into a toddler, then a young boy, sturdy and strong like his father, quiet and observant like his mother. When Thomas was 3, Martha became pregnant again. This time Samuel was less panicked, more confident. He knew what to expect. They made the same arrangements, moving to town in the final weeks of pregnancy, and in April of 1883 they welcomed a daughter. She was tiny and perfect, with Samuel's green eyes and Martha's features. They named her Sarah, after Martha's mother, and if possible, Samuel fell even more in love with his daughter than he had with his son. He was protective of both his children, but there was something special about the way he looked at Sarah, this tiny girl who had him completely wrapped around her finger from the moment she was born. Thomas adjusted to being a big brother with the quiet acceptance that characterized his personality. He would sit by Sarah's cradle and sing to her, the same songs his father had sung to him. The years passed. Thomas and Sarah grew. They were mountain children, as comfortable in the wilderness as their father, learning to track and trap and identify plants. Martha taught them to read using the Bible and her father's old surveying books. Samuel taught them practical mathematics by having them calculate distances and supplies and fur prices. When Thomas was 10 and Sarah was 7, Beatrice passed away peacefully in her sleep. Martha grieved for the aunt who had taken her in, who had loved her despite not understanding her. They buried Beatrice in the Silver Reef Cemetery, and Martha stood with Samuel's arm around her, her children pressed against her sides, and felt the weight of time passing. But life continued. Thomas grew into a teenager, tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet confidence. Sarah remained small and delicate but with a fierce spirit. She wanted to learn everything, do everything, be everywhere at once. In 1890, when Thomas was 13 and Sarah was 10, Samuel sat Martha down one evening after the children were asleep. "I've been thinking," he said. "The children need more education than we can give them here. Thomas is going to be a man soon. He needs to understand the wider world, not just the mountains. And Sarah is so bright, so curious. She deserves opportunities." Martha felt a knot form in her stomach. "What are you suggesting?" "There's a good school in Cedar City. It's not too far. We could send them during the school year, let them board with a family there. They'd come home for summers and holidays. It would give them choices we never had." "You want to send our children away?" Martha's voice was sharp with fear. "Not away, just to school, just to give them options." "Martha, we chose this life because it suited us. But we should let them choose their own lives, not assume they'll want what we want." Martha knew he was right, but it hurt to think of her children leaving, even temporarily. Still, she loved them too much to hold them back. "All right," she said finally. "We'll ask them. Let them decide." To Martha's surprise, both children were excited about the prospect. Thomas wanted to learn more about engineering and mathematics. Sarah wanted to study literature and history. They loved their mountain home, but they were curious about the world beyond it. So, in the fall of 1890, Samuel and Martha took their children to Cedar City and enrolled them in school. It was one of the hardest things Martha had ever done, leaving them there, riding back up to the mountains without them. The cabin felt empty and too quiet. Even Martha, who loved quiet, found the silence oppressive without her children's voices. But Samuel held her when she cried, and reminded her that they had raised strong, capable children who would make their own way in the world. And when Thomas and Sarah came home for Christmas, full of stories about their teachers and classmates, Martha saw the growth in them and knew Samuel had been right. Years passed. Thomas finished school and decided to become a surveyor, following in his grandfather's footsteps. He would work in the mountains, mapping and measuring, combining his love of wilderness with his education. Sarah became a teacher, eventually taking a position in a small school in southern Utah, teaching children to read and think and question. Both children married, brought their spouses to meet their parents in the mountain cabin. Thomas married a practical woman named Elizabeth who loved the outdoors as much as he did. Sarah married a gentle man named David who taught mathematics and thought Sarah hung the moon. Grandchildren came. Martha and Samuel's cabin saw regular visits from their expanding family. The children who had once seemed impossible were now bringing their own children to play in the mountain streams and learn about trap lines and wild plants. In 1900, Samuel and Martha celebrated their 21st wedding anniversary. They were in their late 40s now, no longer young but still strong and vital. Samuel's hair was more silver than brown, and Martha had lines around her eyes from squinting at trap lines and gardens. They sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains, and Samuel said, "Do you ever regret it, marrying me, living up here?" Martha looked at him, at this man who had seen her when no one else had, who had valued her silence when others had found it wanting, who had given her a life beyond anything she could have imagined. "Never," she said. "Not for a single moment." "Good," Samuel said, pulling her close. "Because you're stuck with me now." Happily stuck. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge, listening to the sounds of the mountain night. Somewhere an owl hooted, the creek burbled, a breeze rustled through the pines. "Your quiet is still my favorite sound," Samuel said softly. "And your love is still my greatest gift," Martha replied. They had found each other against all odds, two quiet souls in a noisy world. They had built a life together in the wilderness, raised a family, weathered storms both literal and metaphorical. They had proven that sometimes the things people see as weaknesses are actually strengths, that sometimes being different is exactly right, that sometimes the life that looks wrong from the outside is absolutely perfect from within. The years continued to pass, gentle and full. Samuel and Martha grew older together, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They had celebrated Thomas's 30th birthday just months before, a milestone that made them both feel the weight of years passing, but not in a sad way. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and created a legacy that would outlast them both. On a crisp autumn morning in 1905, Samuel and Martha rode into Silver Reef for what would become a memorable visit. The town had changed significantly since Martha had left it 26 years ago. The silver boom had ended. Many buildings stood empty, but a core community remained, and it still felt like home in a distant, nostalgic way. They visited the church first, where a new reverend now presided but where the same sturdy pews held the same family's descendants. Then they stopped at what used to be Mr. Jacobson's general store, now run by his daughter and son-in-law, where Martha bought fabric for a new quilt. As they prepared to leave town, a young woman approached them hesitantly. She was perhaps 20 years old, plainly dressed, with anxious eyes and a quiet demeanor. "Mrs. Thornton," she said softly, "I heard you were in town. My mother told me about you. She said you married a mountain man even though everyone thought you were too quiet for marriage." Martha smiled gently. "That's true. I'm Lucy Harris. Everyone says the same thing about me, that I'm too quiet, too strange. The men here don't want to court me. My parents are worried I'll be alone forever." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and Martha saw herself at 22 in this girl's worried face. "Being quiet isn't a flaw," Martha said firmly. "It's just a way of being. The right person will love you for exactly who you are, not despite it. But what if there is no right person?" Samuel, who had been standing quietly beside Martha, spoke up. "There is. Trust me. I thought I'd be alone my whole life, too. Then I met Martha and realized I'd just been waiting for someone who understood that silence can be full, not empty. Lucy looked at them both, at the obvious love and partnership between them, and something like hope flickered in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. As they rode away from Silver Reef that day, Martha said to Samuel, "Do you think she'll be all right?" "I think she'll be fine. She just needs to believe in herself the way you learn to believe in yourself." "I didn't believe in myself. I believed in you." "No, Martha. You believed in us. That's different. You had faith that the life we could build together was worth the risk. That took tremendous courage." They reached their cabin as the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Inside, a fire was already laid, ready to be lit. Their shelves were full of preserved food for the coming winter. Everything was ready, prepared, safe. Over dinner that evening, Samuel said, "I've been thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind." "Our children," Martha said immediately. "And their children, that's our legacy." "Yes, but it's more than that. It's also the example we set, the proof that different doesn't mean wrong. That living according to your own nature, not society's expectations, can lead to happiness." "That's a good legacy," Martha agreed. "I want you to know, Martha, that these 26 years with you have been the best years of my life. Every single day with you has been a gift. You made a wild man civilized in all the ways that matter, without taking away the parts of me that need wilderness." Martha felt tears sting her eyes. "And you gave me permission to be myself. You showed me that my quiet was valuable, that I didn't need to apologize for who I was." "Samuel, you saved me." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. That night they lay in their bed, the same bed Samuel had built before their marriage, now worn smooth by years of use. Martha rested her head on Samuel's chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong. "Tell me something," Samuel said. "If you could go back and change anything, would you?" Martha thought about it. About the loneliness of her early life, the rejection from unsuitable suitors, the disapproval of her aunt, the fear of ending up alone. About the risks she had taken marrying a man she barely knew, moving to the wilderness, building a life so different from what she had expected. "No," she said finally. "I wouldn't change a thing. Every difficulty led me here to you, to this life. I would go through it all again exactly the same way if it meant ending up right here." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "I love you, Martha Thornton, more than mountains, more than wilderness, more than solitude. You are my favorite everything. And you are mine." Winter came, bringing deep snow and long nights. Samuel and Martha spent those months the way they always had, checking trap lines, maintaining their home, reading by the fire, making love under heavy quilts, talking about everything and nothing. They were visited twice by Thomas and his family, who came on snowshoes bringing news and grandchildren and laughter. Spring arrived with its usual drama of melting snow and returning life. The creek swelled with runoff. Bears emerged from hibernation. Birds returned from the south. Martha planted her garden, now expanded and productive, providing vegetables all summer long. Summer brought Sarah and her family for an extended visit. The cabin was full of noise and activity, so different from its usual quiet. Samuel taught his grandsons how to fish. Martha taught her granddaughters how to identify edible plants. Everyone helped with the endless work of summer, preserving food, maintaining equipment, preparing for the next winter. As autumn approached and their children prepared to leave, Sarah pulled Martha aside. "Mother, you and Father should think about moving to town. You're getting older. What if something happens up here? What if you need help?" Martha shook her head. "This is our home, Sarah. We belong here. We'll be fine. But your father and I have discussed this. We want to live out our lives here in these mountains. When our time comes, This is where we want to be." Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Martha's face stopped her. "All right, Mother, but promise me you'll be careful, always." The years continued their march. 1906 became 1907, then 1908. Samuel and Martha moved a bit slower, but they were still capable, still strong, still deeply in love. They had settled into the comfortable rhythm of a long marriage, where words were often unnecessary, where a glance could communicate volumes, where silence was companionship rather than absence. On a golden afternoon in September 1908, Samuel and Martha sat on their porch watching the aspen trees turn from green to gold. They were both in their mid-50s now, weathered by mountain life but not broken by it. "You remember the first time we really talked?" Samuel asked. "At the church after the mine collapse, of course. You told me my quiet was your favorite sound. I meant it then, and I mean it now. 29 years later, and your quiet is still the most beautiful sound in my world." Martha reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. His hand was as large and strong as ever, though marked with more scars now, more evidence of a life fully lived. "I never thanked you properly," Martha said, "for seeing me, for choosing me, for giving me this life. Martha, I'm the one who should be grateful. You took a chance on a rough mountain man with no social graces and no prospects beyond fur trading. You made this cabin a home. You gave me children, a family, a reason to be more than just a man surviving in the wilderness. We were always meant to find each other," Martha said. "I believe that. Two quiet souls in a noisy world finding peace together." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of fire. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Closer, an elk bugled. The creek murmured its eternal song. And on the porch of a small cabin in the Utah mountains, two people who had found each other against all odds sat hand in hand, content in the life they had built together. Their story became a quiet legend in Silver Reef and the surrounding areas. Young women who felt different, who didn't fit society's expectations, would hear about Martha Henderson, who married the mountain man and found happiness in the wilderness. They would take courage from it, would believe that somewhere out there was a life that would fit them properly. As winter approached in late 1908, Samuel and Martha prepared their cabin with the efficiency of long practice. Food stores were full. Firewood was stacked high. Traps were checked and repaired. Everything was ready for the cold months ahead. On the first truly cold night of winter, they lay in bed with snow falling softly outside, the fire crackling in the other room, and talked about their life together. "If I died tomorrow," Samuel said, "I would die the happiest man who ever lived." "Don't talk about dying," Martha said, but without real alarm. They were old enough now that death was a reality to be acknowledged, not feared. "I'm not being morbid. I'm being grateful. I'm saying that every day with you has been exactly what I wanted, what I needed." "You gave me everything, Martha." "We gave each other everything," Martha corrected. "That's what marriage is supposed to be, I think. Not one person completing the other, but two whole people choosing to share their wholeness. When did you get so wise? I learned it from you." Samuel pulled her closer, and they fell asleep wrapped around each other as they had for 29 years, as they would for all the years to come. The winter passed peacefully. Spring came again in 1909, bringing their children and grandchildren for visits, bringing new life to the mountains, bringing renewal. Thomas was now 32, established in his surveying business, a father of 4. Sarah was 29, a respected teacher with 3 children of her own. The family that had started with 2 quiet people in a small cabin had grown and flourished. During the summer of 1909, Samuel and Martha celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a surprise party at the cabin, bringing food and decorations, and what seemed like half the remaining population of Silver Reef. Speeches were made. Toasts were raised. Thomas stood and told stories about his childhood in the mountains, about learning to track from his father and learning to read from his mother. Sarah spoke about how her parents' love had shown her what to look for in a husband, how their partnership had set the standard for her own marriage. And then Samuel stood, tall and still strong despite his years, and spoke in his quiet, deep voice that commanded attention without demanding it. 30 years ago, I married a woman everyone said was too quiet for marriage. They told her she needed to be different, to be more talkative, more social, more something other than what she was. But I looked at Martha Henderson and saw perfection. I saw a woman who didn't need to fill silence with meaningless words. I saw strength and capability and a quiet confidence that most people missed because they were looking for the wrong things. He turned to Martha, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch even after 3 decades together. Martha, you are still the most extraordinary person I have ever known. Your quiet is still my favorite sound. Your presence is still my greatest comfort, and loving you is still the best decision I ever made. Thank you for 30 years of happiness. Thank you for our children and our life, and for being exactly who you are. There wasn't a dry eye in the cabin, including Martha's. She stood and went to her husband, and he pulled her into his arms, and everyone applauded. Later, after the guests had left and they were alone again, Martha said, "That was quite a speech. I meant every word. I know you did. That's what made it so perfect." They stood on their porch, looking at the mountains they had called home for 3 decades, and Martha thought about the improbable journey that had brought her here. From a rejected, too quiet girl in Silver Reef to a beloved wife and mother in these mountains. From uncertainty and fear to confidence and peace. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked. "I'm thinking about Lucy Harris. Remember her? The girl who approached us in town that day, the quiet one who reminded you of yourself." "Yes. I wonder what happened to her." "I hope she found her own Samuel. Maybe we should find out. We could make a trip to town, ask around." They did exactly that the following week. What they discovered pleased them greatly. Lucy Harris had married a quiet blacksmith named James, and they lived on the outskirts of town with their 2 young children. The couple kept to themselves mostly, but those who knew them reported they seemed very happy. "See," Samuel said, "there's someone for everyone, even us quiet folks who don't fit conventional molds." "Especially us," Martha corrected. The years that followed were gentle ones. Samuel and Martha moved more slowly now, didn't range as far, relied more on their children's visits for supplies and connection to the wider world. But they were content, happy in their mountain home, secure in their love for each other. In the fall of 1915, Samuel fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing concerning at first, but it persisted and worsened. By October, Martha was seriously worried. She wanted to take him to town to see a doctor, but Samuel refused. "I'm fine," he insisted. "It's just a cold, it will pass." But it didn't pass. By November, Samuel was weak and feverish. Martha finally sent word to Thomas, who came immediately and convinced his father to return to town with him. Dr. Brennan, now elderly himself but still practicing, examined Samuel and delivered grim news. Pneumonia, advanced, complicated by decades of mountain winters and hard living. "He needs rest, warmth, and care," the doctor said. "He may recover, but at his age it's uncertain." Martha barely left Samuel's side. They had taken a room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, which was now run by Mrs. Chen's daughter. Martha sat with Samuel day and night, applying cool cloths when he fevered, warming him when he shook with chills, holding his hand, talking to him even when he was too weak to respond. Their children came. Thomas and Sarah sat vigil with their mother, taking turns so she could rest, though she rarely did. The grandchildren came to say goodbye just in case, though no one said those words out loud. For 2 weeks, Samuel hovered between life and death. Then, slowly, he began to improve. The fever broke. His breathing eased, color returned to his face. By early December, he was sitting up, eating solid food, arguing that he was well enough to go home. "Not yet," Dr. Brennan said firmly. "Another few weeks to regain your strength." Samuel endured it barely. He was a caged mountain lion in that boarding house room, pacing restlessly, staring out the window at the mountains, fretting about trap lines and food stores and whether the cabin was weathering the winter storms. "It's fine," Martha assured him repeatedly. Thomas checked on it. "Everything is secure." Finally, just before Christmas, Samuel was pronounced well enough to travel home. The journey back to the cabin was slow and careful, with Samuel still weak but determined. When they finally arrived, when Samuel walked through the door into their home, he seemed to gain strength just from being there. "I thought I was going to die in that town," he said, sitting by the fire. "I couldn't bear the thought. I need to be here in these mountains with you." "You're here now," Martha said, settling beside him. "You're home and you're going to be fine." Samuel recovered fully over the winter, though the illness had aged him. He moved more carefully now, tired more easily. But his spirit was undiminished, and his love for Martha and their mountain life remained as strong as ever. They celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary in January 1916. Just a quiet celebration, the two of them alone in their cabin, but it felt momentous. They had survived another near loss, had been granted more time together. 37 years, Samuel marveled. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found your locket by the creek. Sometimes it feels like we've been together forever." "Both are true," Martha said. "Time is strange that way." "I want more years," Samuel said. "I want decades more with you. I want to meet our great-grandchildren, see what becomes of the family we started, grow so old that we forget what young felt like." "Then we'll have that," Martha said firmly. "We've survived this long, we can survive longer." And they did. Samuel regained his strength. They returned to their routines, modified slightly for their advancing age but still rich and full. They still checked trap lines, though shorter routes now. They still tended the garden, though with more help from visiting family. They still sat on their porch watching the sun set, still held each other every night, still found joy in the quiet life they had built together. In the summer of 1918, when Samuel was 60 and Martha was 58, they sat on their porch and took stock of their life together. 39 years of marriage, 2 children who had grown into impressive adults, 7 grandchildren who were growing up strong and curious and loved, a cabin that had weathered 4 decades of mountain seasons, a love that had only deepened with time. "We did well," Samuel said. "2 quiet people who nobody thought would amount to much. We did well." "We did better than well," Martha said. "We did exactly what we were meant to do. We lived according to our nature, not according to what others expected, and we were happy." "Are happy," Samuel corrected. Present tense. "We're still here, still living, still happy." "Yes," Martha agreed. "Still happy." As the sun set that evening, painting the mountains in gold and crimson, Martha thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. From a rejected girl in Silver Reef to a beloved wife and mother in these mountains. From uncertainty and loneliness to confidence and deep connection. From being told she was too quiet for marriage to finding a man who said her quiet was his favorite sound. "Thank you," she said to Samuel. "For what?" "For seeing me, for loving me, for giving me this life. for 39 years of happiness. Samuel pulled her close, and she felt the steady strength of him, the warmth, the love that had sustained her for nearly 4 decades. "Thank you," he replied, "for saying yes. For taking a chance on a rough mountain man. For making me more than I ever could have been alone. For being my partner, my love, my everything." They sat together as darkness fell, and the stars emerged. Two quiet souls who had found each other in a noisy world, who had built a life of meaning and love and purpose in these wild mountains. And as the night wind whispered through the pines and the creek sang its endless song, they held each other and knew they were exactly where they belonged, exactly as they were meant to be, together in the quiet that they both loved best.